So today is in fact our third talk on the humanist schools in Uganda. We were visited in 2009 and 2014 by Steve Hurd, who is the chairman of the Schools Trust. So it's been 6 years since we've had a proper update on what's happening in the schools in Uganda. So our speaker today is Chris Smith. Chris is a member of Dorset Humanists and she's a trustee of the Uganda Humanist Schools Trust. She's just come back, well, maybe a few months ago, from her fourth trip to Uganda. I think it was number 4.
Yes.
And she's going to give us an update on how the schools are faring in the post-COVID era. So would you please give Chris a warm welcome?
Agandi Basebo Banyabo, and that is all the local language you will get from me today. It means greetings, ladies and gentlemen. I'm going to start with words and words on the screen, not been edited quite as down as I would have liked. Then there will be pictures and words, and then there will be some more words, and then questions and answers. So, Uganda in East Africa, roughly square. It's landlocked. It's mostly on a 5,000 foot plateau, so it's not that warm at night. And there are lakes Victoria, Albert, Edward. It's mostly above the equator, which is somewhere just about here, if you can get the idea from my pointing. Many roads are still dirt, and the bad roads are made worse by wet weather. Distances are deceptive. From 1894 to independence in 1962, it was a British protectorate, and the school system is unsurprisingly modelled on the British. So primary and secondary school are now compulsory. Primary started in 2008. Secondary more recently. There are government schools. They are nominally free, but not really in practice. They are mostly in the larger places. They may not be well built, they may not be well run. The teachers who pretty much have jobs for life may not actually turn up. And so the private schools are filling the gaps. It's not that the private schools are elitist. Some of them will be better than the government schools, some of them will be worse, and a lot will depend on how close you are to a large place, large town or city, or how deep in the village you are. There are day schools, but again, there is a lot of boarding, more than we would have here. Some of it is parental preference, but a lot of it is to the logistics of travelling from one place to the other. Again, a short distance can have lots of hazards and take a long time. I checked with an ex-colleague, and he reckons that 80 to 85% of government schools have a religious affiliation. Private schools may have been started by a group of parents, that's not at all unusual, but of course many of them have been started by religious organisations. So here we are, the visiting trustees. I first met Steve at a Shropshire humanist meeting very, very long time ago. My subsequent voluntary service overseas in Uganda was actually just a very fortunate coincidence. So Steve's in the middle with his wife Hilary. Yes, he is the chair, and Hilary administers the scholarships. They first went to Uganda in the early 1970s. They were new graduates and newly wed. And I think I could say the rest comes from that. They went through the British Council to teach in a secondary school, and Steve decided he wanted to do a master's degree, so he enrolled at Makerere, which is the big Kampala university. And his association with Makerere through the British Council and other projects continued until very recently. Hilary is Professor Emerita Hilary Hurd. Her subject being microbiology, her specialism being parasitology. She knows a lot about malarial parasites. She did a lot of research in Mali, not so much in Uganda. At the far left and right are the Millers, Glenda and Derek. They had been in the same humanist group as Steve and Hilary. We're talking Cheshire, Staffordshire way, and they're also close neighbours. They eventually agreed to visit Uganda on one of the Trust's humanist visits. Their testimonies, if you'll excuse the word, when they came back, make extraordinarily touching reading. They were so impressed by what the schools were achieving from such an impoverished base. And the one who isn't me is Crystal White. Crystal's association is through the St. Louis, Missouri Ethical Society. The Trust has had long contacts with the society, and they have particularly tried to fund girls' education through scholarships, particularly for girls, and they also have done almost all of the funding for AfriPads, reusable sanitary protection, which all of that just helps keep girls in class and in school. I will say that she did become a trustee, but she's having to step back from that responsibility because of some health issues unrelated to being in Uganda for the best part of a month. And the little old lady is me. Okay. 2019 we had our AGM. We had 2 high schools, Mustard Seed north of Ginger, where the Nile is supposed to start, and Isaac Newton near Masaka, which was quite close to where my VSO was. Mustard Seed is in a very poor area. The school buildings are spread out each side of a dirt road. Isaac Newton's site is on a hill. It's all purpose built, some on land donated by the director's family. 2019, they were both ranking highly for exam results in their districts, even nationally. That's O and A levels. The infrastructure was approaching completion. There were big halls in both schools. This allows registration as an exam centre, which is very important. And facilities such as water, power, kitchen, sanitation were all improving. They would surely attract more middle-class parents able to pay sensible amount of fees and could become self-funding with some scholarship money, and the scholarship money goes to very bright but very poor students to get them through secondary. Whose schools are they? Cammy Moses is director and head teacher of Mustard Seed. Peter Kisarinya is director of Isaac Newton. They met at Makerere University. Both were involved in the Ugandan humanist movement. They both wanted to start humanist schools. Steve knew them through working at Makerere, and the other schools in this talk have similar stories. The Trust supports but does not open schools. We are not missionaries. All the schools, as I've said, were started and are led by Ugandans. They are not for profit. Humanist, secular and rationalist values are propounded. All young people are welcomed equally. Positive discipline is practiced, and there is no distinction of religion, sect, tribe or clan. The tribes and clans are still there. Okay, what happened in COVID? The Ugandan government closed everything down more or less overnight. Schools, public transport, it all closed down. With permission from the donors, the scholarship money was used to support the teachers and other staff. It was used to buy government learning materials, which were distributed by the teachers deep in the village. Okay. Many parents in Uganda, all regions of Uganda, are subsistence farmers. So the students, when they went home, were working the land or other manual work. Most found they preferred study. We were told this over and over again. Of course, there was social isolation, little opportunity to trade, small savings were used up. There was an increase in physical and sexual violence, pregnancies, and dangerous village abortions. There was hunger, and there was no government support. But also, schools became bankrupt. A Muslim primary near Mustard Seed, an evangelical primary right next door to Isaac Newton, closed down, and the locals asked Moses and Peter to take over. We happen to have had two very generous bequests, and we were able to buy the school, start refurbishment, retain many of the teachers. There will be excellent feeder primaries for the high school. So almost overnight, our two schools became 4. During COVID, we agreed to support 2 more primaries, both in the west of Uganda. That was 6. There were urgent invitations to visit 4 others, making 10. Of those 4, Classical High proved a drive too far. We were able to visit Eagles View, Star Classic and New Hope. Supporting any of these is well beyond the Trust's ability for now. Full disclosure, we do also support a humanist primary in Kasese, which is to the west but not very far to the west, with grants for books. Impoverished but high-attaining pupils can apply for scholarships to Isaac Newton, and those pupils have achieved extraordinarily well, and they are good ambassadors for humanism, having been brought up in it from their first school experiences. So I did my final visit in 2014, ticked all the boxes, put that behind me, did not intend to return to Uganda. But a visit to all 10 schools and a 5-day conference, humanist conference, for all of the teachers and other staff at all of 10 schools were proposed. Rest days and game parks were included. The conference is now proposed for January 2023. I wasn't certain I would still go, but I decided to go all the same. And now, not just words, there will be pictures as well. Basically, all I've done is take the schools that we actually visited in the order. There were gaps for travel and doing other things in between. There will usually be tours of the sites and buildings, lesson observations, meetings with board members and PTA, community visits. There will be lunch, presentation, dances and speeches. I've tried to pick up aspects of all of those at the different schools. So we started off north of Ginger, alleged source of the Nile, at Mustard Seed Secondary School. This was one, remember, of the original 2 schools. Big, really quite extensive grounds. And this is the only time I've ever actually managed to take a photograph of cooks at work. They do cook on wood fires, but we have funded those which are the most efficient use of wood. And in fact, 2 or 3 of our directors are talking about using some land to plant trees in order to have a source of firewood. Firewood is one of the big expenses in the schools. Remember that the secondaries are almost entirely boarding students. Hilary was most embarrassed and perhaps a little bit pleased to have a girls' dormitory named after her. And I've put this one in. This is one of the boys' dormitories. Nadiopi Gadula IV house. He is the king, not of Uganda. Each of the regions does still have its own king. Those of you who are interested in history will probably know a lot more about the problems that has led to than I do. The boy students were very pleased to welcome us to their dormitory. They had rooms, I'm almost certain it was for 2 double bunks, so they were quite small off the corridors, but they'd personalised them with funny names and lists of who was in there. Difficult to take photographs inside, but that's a view from the outside window. Does need replacing, but at least that would keep the mosquitoes out. Some of the boys were still sleeping in classrooms. Now, this had been a feature of COVID with trying to get social distancing, but at this point they were still being used because there was a bit of an overflow from the boys' dormitories. This is the computer room. The government has computer studies on the curriculum for primary and secondary. Of course, there is no government support to actually get these set up, or even training for the teachers to teach it. So this is the Mustard Seed Secondary computer room, and those are actually some primary children who'd gone there to see what was going on. The power was off, so there really wasn't an awful lot to see. And this is the library stroke reading room, and it was nice to see that they got the books for the new curriculum. Yes, during COVID, the government introduced a new lower secondary curriculum. So there were the new books for the new curriculum, but obviously the books are being used. And that's one of the main things that we have funded is books, because actual books that they can study from have proved to be one of the biggest things that improve exam results. The senior boy, the head boy in blue, he was one of those who took us just along the dirt road, good dirt as it happens, to Mustard Seed Primary. It's got the branding up there already. That's a typical classroom, up on a concrete plinth and with some shade. Door holes and window holes are always there, glazing shutters and doors, I've seen many a primary school which didn't have any of those, but not ours. Every classroom that we went in, any of the schools that are up and running, was an encouraging place for children and students to be. It is not unusual in primary schools to have nothing on a classroom wall except a notice with the names of the pupils who did badly in the test 6 months ago. Nothing to encourage them or interest them at all. So I do have a bit of obsession about display in classrooms. I'll try not to mention it again. So this is one of the lower classes in the primary, and learning by repetition and rote is not always a bad thing. The baby classes are always good value for money. They kept going like that for quite a long time. They are learning English. I can't make all of it out, but it was sister, brother, at one point. So we are now back in the secondary, big contrast. Government schools, one of the bad things about government schools is that class sizes can be very big, 150 in junior classes. But here we are looking at a class that took place in one of the halls in the hall at Mustard Seed. This is the new curriculum. The teachers have welcomed it. It's supposed to be interactive. It's based on groups of 10 working together, but many groups in one classroom being taught the same. And this is a maths lesson. If you want to know about surds, please speak to me at the end. It was incredibly slow progress, but none of the students looked restless, and I really don't think that was just because there were us Bazungu there. They asked me to teach some maths to the lower sixth. Didn't even take my rucksack off. And instead of talking about interactive, I actually did interactive, much to the interest of the lads and some of the pupils outside. My finest hour. Meetings. So we have got Camia Moses, the director and head teacher in the pink shirt, the head teacher of the primary, whose name I can't remember, sorry, in the white suit. And it was well attended by teachers. We were pleased about that. So the teachers expressed their difficulties they'd had personally through COVID and their hopes for their futures and the futures of the school. And there is Steve doing what he does best, being extraordinarily tactful and trying to have their expectations of what the trust could do considerably more realistic. Community visits are always by invitation. Usually 1 or 2 or 3 of the students at any particular school. I do think that these people maybe had been sitting there waiting rather a long time. They look quite fed up. Oh, and photographs are also only by invitation or agreement. There is a thing called poverty tourism, and we try to avoid that. This lady was actually very jolly, but when she was ready to have her photograph taken, she did the serious Ugandan. Look, she is roasting maize for her lunch. And this grandmother was wonderful. If I'd had a Babel fish and could hear all the funny things that she was saying that was cracking up the locals, she was so pleased to see us. Generous, however little a family has, they will share what they have, and inordinately proud of her grandsons at the school and the progress they are making. Alongside the home, this young lady who had dropped out from school was mixing the red earth with water. Hopefully she remembered the important dried grass. She is making bricks to be sold. Her fees were being paid by her uncle. The uncle died during COVID, and there wasn't the money for her to attend. This is disconnected chronologically, but I want to talk about scholarships. You may recognise the Millers, Derek and Glenda, from that first picture. The young lady in the middle is Christine. Christine was at Mustard Seed Secondary. Derek and Glenda were there, paid for her scholarship money. Did I say they're retired lawyers? Maybe I didn't. She didn't actually do very well at A-level. She underperformed. But she had by then decided she wanted to be a lawyer, so she sat the national competitive exam for the law school at Makerere, and she came top. She's now in her second year studying law. She is still being funded by Derek and Glenda, but that's outside the remit of the trust, so it isn't our donors' money doing that. That may be the first woman president of Uganda. I mean, she was just so interesting to talk to, wonderfully articulate, and apart from her studies in her spare time, she's working at a law centre where people come and she and others try to help people around with their problems. Scholarships can be very powerful. Okay, so we did Mustard Seed Secondary and Primary, and on our way to wherever it was going next, I haven't even brought the itinerary, it's got so many scribbles on because there were so many changes. And this again has the link with Mustard Seed. Two young men who'd gone through Mustard Seed Secondary, they'd gone on and done further education, and they had decided they would like to start a primary school in the same area. Considering we'd only told them that morning at about 10 that we would definitely be able to visit, the preparation was stupendous. Oh, and yes, if you've noticed, the apostrophe is always there and in the right place at Eagle's View. The young man with the waistcoat is one of the two who they have started a school. They want to start a much better, bigger school. Still not sure what I feel about that. Okay, and then there were really, really well dressed with good uniform. They'd made such an effort, and they did a poem to us about COVID and their expectations from the trust, which were always higher than, This was a Saturday, but a lot of people from the immediate community had come along, and there were speeches. I do like the corporate uniform from the staff, and that's the other young man who wants to give him the money to build a school, from Mustard Seed. And there's me, that's my listening to speeches in Uganda face. And in the middle of the picture, that is Kamya Moses. That is him doing his I am a serious Ugandan man. Or maybe he's just got his speeches face on, I'm not sure. The dancing. There is always dancing. There was one dance that they did basically in their school uniform with bits of skirts round, and then they all went away and then all came back again. That was just the end of it. Again, there was an interval for travelling, and we did stay at some other places. So then we went on to Isaac Newton, the high school familiar, and the newly established primary school. I knew that school really very well. I had bought a car, and I was only 3 hours from Masaka by road. So I really did visit relatively often, shall we say. What Peter has done on that site is absolutely amazing. This drone footage is from earlier this year. There is still some building going on. I first visited that site in April 2008. And I could well up just looking at this picture. To have a new school, first make your bricks. And that's just what they were doing there. You make them, you build them into a kiln, and you fire them. Peter is a physicist, a very good physics teacher, a physics examiner at A level. So the science lab was always going to be a priority. Here he is, Kisarinja Peter, someone I've got a great deal of time for all of them. I know Peter better, and he can reach to the top of the board, which is more than I ever managed. They've done some practical, I wasn't in that actual lesson, but they've done some sort of practical. And this is the view from the back of the lab. So you can see, you know, they are good quality rooms, and they do have a lot of young people in there. Very orderly. 2 girls in good uniform. I think they may both be scholarship girls in their dormitory, and some lads in theirs. There was a new head of art. There was a new head of art who was really keen that we didn't just look at the sciencey stuff, and so he showed us what they'd been doing with textiles, and I think it was block printing, I'm really not sure. And if the clay isn't red, if it's grey, you can use it as modelling clay, which is what they're doing here. And they were making masks. This skips over a few hours. Lunch had been served, dances had been danced, and debating is very important in Ugandan schools. And I am assured by Derek and Glenda that that was one of the things that really struck them, how high the standard of debate was in the secondary schools. That says lockdown has done more harm than good. Treated very, very seriously. That's the view from the back of the room, and there were other pupils, both secondary and primary, coming in. That is the new hall, which we hadn't seen before. And I was sitting near these two young lads, and they were absolutely following every word, every syllable, especially the one in blue. And now we're back in the primary, and we're back in the baby class. And again, they can keep going like that. These little kids have got energy. We saw a lot of lessons. They were all, I would have given them all top marks if I'd been judging them when I was a teacher trainer out there. This teacher has got a visual aid, very unusual. How to tell the time, he was so engaged. This was a maths lesson. Very good in the Ugandan style, plenty for the children around the walls. Most of the children, most of the time. They'd probably got up really, really early and not had any breakfast, so I think they need to be treated carefully. There was dancing. It did have drumming done by some senior pupils, and that's just how it started off. I have got video clip, but it's very long. So we also went into the community, and this lady was one of the ladies who'd invited us, and she's very nicely dressed, and she was very serious for the photograph. But again, once the cameras were put away, she was quite animated in local language. And this lady got shy at the last minute, but still wanted her photograph taken. And, you know, the local people see that there are Europeans and American, so they come and they look at us. Kanungu was the one school that we were all desperate to see. No trustees had been there. We had met the director on Zoom calls. And then 3 of us tested positive for COVID. Glenda became poorly, didn't know what it was, tested positive. The rest of us tested. I tested positive, and Crystal tested positive. We have no idea what the common factor is, if there is one. The elder driver, Driver Francis, was fully vaccinated, and he was fully informed of our status. So along with Glenda's negative testing husband, Derek, 4 of us booked into a quiet lodge for 2 nights. And the other driver, Driver Adam, took the herds to Kanungu. Kanungu is in the far southwest, near Bundy, home of the mountain gorillas. It's difficult to access. The last 2.5 hours for the final 30 miles. It can take 4 hours in the rainy season. Robert Magaro was a schoolboy in 2000 when an End Days cult persuaded local people to attend church. The doors and windows were sealed, the building was torched. 800 men, women and children burned to death. The cult leaders were not harmed. The first thing Robert noticed returning from school was the smell of roasting meat. As an adult, he opened a small secular school, which was soon destroyed by heavy rain. His father donated better land. Other humanists were and are involved in supporting Robert, and we joined them with funding for buildings on the new site. In spite of COVID, the main work was done on budget and to plan. It opened properly in the second term of this year, and as I said, this was the first time any of us had physically visited there, and that was only 2. That was the state of the new school building, one of the old school buildings after a rainstorm, and it was his father that gave him the land. Robert looks a lovely person, and his parents look equally nice. It has the potential to be our primary Isaac Newton. I mean, he's got an eye for the detail. He studied horticulture, I think, or agriculture at university. He is particularly interested in growing trees appropriate for the local area, so there already he's planted a lot of small trees and bushes. Complete novelty. There aren't many pupils there, but they'd put on a fashion parade. Sportswear, schoolwear, and what they would wear to go to a wedding or celebration, or possibly church, or what they would wear for working in the garden. Again, all of the classrooms, from what I've seen through photographs, were well set up, quality furniture and posters on the walls. Ugandans who have visitors feed them with what they've got. Robert was really quite desperate before we went out that he would not be able to afford the money to give us lunch. So that money was supplied by Stephen Hillary. And that didn't come from what the donors give in to the charity. Matoke is being prepared, green banana, not plantain. I've eaten a lot of that. And there are a small number of children sitting in the shade eating their lunch. Wherever I went, however humble the small restaurant might have been, there was always water to wash your hands before you ate with your hands. And this is the last of the schools, Katumba in Bundy, Budgio. I mean, I just love saying Bundy, Budgio. I was convinced I'd been to Bundy, Budgio because it's, you know, it's just such a wonderful, anyway. It's a beautiful, but again, it's a poor area beyond the Roansori Mountains, Mountains of the Moon. It's alleged there is snow on the top of, I think it's Mount Stanley, I'm not sure. And it's close to the Democratic Republic of Congo border. Family ties, tribal loyalties and local languages are common to both sides. Of course, the borders were established by Europeans in the colonial days. In 2016, an attempt to gain freedom for the kingdom, fomented by witch doctors, led to many dying. About 100 men from Katumba were included. The community wanted to do their best for the half orphans and some full double orphans left. And a young graduate, Irumba Juma, started running a primary school with humanist ethos. The site, buildings and facilities were poor, yet very good results at the end of primary leaving exams, PLE, think 11 plus. I was going to say in the olden days, but we're in Dorset now, so it's still around. And trustees had visited in 2018 and 2019 and reported to the supporters. A single supporter gave the money for the buildings on the new site. The trust helped to rehouse a local lady who was living in very, very, very poor conditions. In exchange, she gave the land, which the community cleared and levelled. Katumba Humanist Community Primary School appeared, and the builders stayed on site during COVID, sort of big bubble with food being brought in from time to time, more or less on budget, if not exactly to plan. This was the school that was seen by the trustees in 2018 and 2019. And today is Wednesday, the 13th of July, 2022. The new school is already well over capacity, so some of the buildings on the old site are still being used, particularly for the very youngest children who live close by and who would find it difficult to walk to school. This deeply Roman Catholic lady is the lady who donated the land, and absolutely delighted to have 3 grandchildren enrolled at the school. This is the new school site. It was after the school lessons had finished that we arrived for the first visit, and we were mobbed. I found it uncomfortable. And I don't like this picture, because those eyes to me say, you are the white saviour, and we are really not at all comfortable with that. The next day we arrived just as lessons were starting, and I got a much better feel from the whole place. And you know, the buildings aren't all finished, but where they are and how they're laid out and how they're finished is excellent. The teachers were there, pleased to meet us. I saw a lot of lessons. That teacher's got a bow tie on. You can't see it on there, but I've shown you this. I'm sure you can't read all the words. This is the first time, and I saw an awful lot of primary schools when I was doing teacher training observations, that is actually talking about something African. They are talking about the different Bantu tribes in Uganda and in Tanzania. So I thought that was worth. The engagement, the teachers and the pupils was there in every classroom. And now we have the elephant in the room. Haven't mentioned up to now primary boarding. We've always said as the trust, if it was ever mentioned as something that we might do in future, we did not want to support primary boarding. We are in the process of changing our minds. These schools want to have primary boarding, sometimes because of the sheer distances involved, sometimes it's parental pressure. Boarding particularly for the candidate years, primary 6 and primary 7, which are so important. Children can stay on site, they will be safe, they will be taught, they will be constantly speaking English, not local language, all of which are desirable. And they will not be trudging home from school at the end of a very long day to go out and weed the banana patch. Some of these children, when they're not at school, are doing what we would consider extremely hard physical work. The other things with this picture, dormitory fires. Dormitory fires are not unusual in Uganda. Usually the very youngest children, and they can board from 3 in some schools, in some places. Of course, they're locked in at night to keep them safe, but if their only light is candle or oil lamp, or I've seen some dodgy electrics, then fires are likely to break out. Tragic deaths, because they're locked in for their own safety. Also, through that, the government legislation is you cannot have 3-tier bunks, and you must have metal bunks, not timber. Oh, I've forgotten another reason for fires, not specifically in dormitories: lightning. Kanungu and Katumba are both in high lightning strike areas, so we have found, hopefully value for money, lightning conductors to be put on both those schools, their most exposed buildings. And there is Juma. Juma is an unusual Ugandan man. He's very optimistic and bubbly and grins nearly all the time, instead of being serious and formal as you've seen the others be. He's also very, very ambitious for the school. So Steve there is probably saying, now, come now, Juma, you know that we are a small charity. While we were in lesson observation, chairs and awnings were being brought in. People from the local community were pouring in. In the afternoon, there were presentations. Sorry, after lunch, I mustn't forget to mention lunch. After lunch, there were presentations. This young man, from a science class, they've made a sort of digger thing out of local materials to demonstrate how levers work. It kept falling apart. He kept fastening it together again. He never looked from side to side. That was perseverance at its finest, and in front of a very big audience. That's the science master, and he did get it to work. There were poems, very long poems. There were local dignitaries. The lady in the red and white is the LC1 Local Council 1. She spoke in local language, and Juma there on the microphone translated. I've never seen a community event like this, nor had any of the other trustees. In that particular area, there are a flute, whose name I should remember but I've forgotten. You blow across an open reed. There is also, and again I meant to check the name before I came out, there's I would describe it as a marimba. It's a wooden xylophone, but again it is particular to that area. You'll see it in a minute. And they're dancing, and the dancing, and the teachers joined in, and some of the parents joined in. It was the best dancing I've ever seen. I've kept this so you can see I think it's an aruba or something. And I'm running over, so I'm moving on. Okay. Juma is a very optimistic person, and I'm not terribly optimistic. I'm not pessimistic, I'm realistic. So it was very good after the formal board meeting, Steve's on the board of each of the schools, that we had a meeting with him and his directors. That's a really balanced team, including a retired civil engineer, which is why the buildings were not according to plan, because he worked out a better plan. We were joined by Aaron and Helen, who would show us their schools the next day. They were two of the people who wanted us to support them to start new, or at least to develop their humanist primary schools. Aaron School was just off the main road. It wasn't. This is the Ugandan optimism again. And when we got to this particular bad bit, we got out and walked. For those of you who haven't seen me walking, those poles were really useful, and that's Adam, the young driver, getting very worried about his grandma. Star Classic, nice setting, mountains in the background. This is Aaron. He had travelled on public transport from Kampala. He was going to be travelling back to Kampala. This was the middle day of his father's 3-day funeral event. This is his school. So we navigated our way back to the tarred road again, and this time it was only a short drive from the tarred road. The lady in pink on the path there is Helen, and we had this, shortish drive, vans parked up, and here we were, very nice village centre with a few houses dotted around, people coming out to greet us. What a lovely place for a village school, we thought. Alongside that track, here is Helen. The land behind her is where she would please like us to build a completely new school. The existing school is a considerable distance back along the tarred road. That's where the children from the village are walking each day, and then again up a rough track on foot. New Hope Humanist School. Very good use made of the plastering on the outside of the buildings, but bricks are cheaper than glazing, so those rooms must be quite extraordinarily dark. That's the baby class. Up to 40 small children are being taught in there, but they've still got display on the walls. Okay, I didn't want that to be the last school slide, so there's me, Francis and Adam, and I am looking so pleased that we and the buses survived, and that's the leopard that we saw. Okay, before I ask for your support, why are Steve, Hilary, Glenda, Derek and I so committed to these schools? In spite of a life-threatening illness after a previous visit. Getting to know them better, spending nearly a month together, I realised there's something that we have in common. I grew up on a council estate, eldest of 3 girls, one small wage coming in. Turned out I was good at passing exams. And because I could go on after school leaving age, even up to 16, my parents had to sign to say they'd leave me at grammar school till I was 16. I got an education and a degree and became a teacher. All of the other people that I've just mentioned, the details are different, but we are all first generation, educated, beyond school leaving age, or in Hilary's case, I think a little bit older. Perhaps that's why it's so important to us. And Crystal, our American, she grew up in a very rural part of Missouri. I think she said Pentecostal family. Girls were educated, but as soon as they'd finished the main bulk of their education, they were expected to get married and have children and work on the land. She and her sister had very different ideas, and it caused major rifts in the family. So also for her, education had been a way to give opportunities in life. For me, it was a roller coaster. I was going to put another picture chapter in there, I didn't get around to it. So the enthusiasm and energy of the young people and the staff, the engagement of the local communities, especially Katumba, the distress, not too strong a word, of the directors facing increasing costs, decreasing income. I saw fuel price inflation as we went along the roads. Do they send children home whose fees have not been paid? It's the economy. Stupid. But there are individual challenges. We encouraged the schools and teachers to start paying into the National Social Security Fund, equivalent of our national insurance. Those payments are overdue, even though they weren't being paid wages, they were being paid subsistence. One crop a year in Kamuli and poor harvest. Few paying fees, some paying in foodstuffs and firewood. Moses was very reluctant to share with us that he could not afford to give his boarders breakfast. They were having 2 meals a day, not 3. We found out that some double orphans had been left behind by the Muslim school. As Kamya Moses was actually paying for them to be looked after, not from the trust. And having to change priorities, he was concerned with our reactions. We had a very good meeting, detailed meeting, so that if he did need to change what had been agreed in future, he would share it with us. We were almost certain to say yes. And bed bugs. Pretty much all of the above. But at Isaac Newton, there's been unexpected antagonism of some teachers towards scholarship students. As soon as we're aware, that's been dealt with. Breaking the community means that there's a need to bolster humanism, and the planned conference should address this. Meanwhile, Peter and Ezra, the head teacher, are working on it with the new staff. Robert Magara at Kanungu, going to the middle, local church leader preached against the school. It was a place to teach homosexuality, which of course is strictly illegal in Uganda, but Robert and Steve spoke with the local inspectors and sorted that one out. Others of our schools have faced similar problems over the years. Irumba Juma, ever cheerful. The bridge had been washed away. They were handing bricks from hand to hand, where he would like us to build a new bridge. The head of the kindergarten had died giving birth to her 7th child. That was a couple of days before we went out. The infant died too. The son of the school's director of education was in ICU in Kampala following a road traffic accident. Brain surgery to remove a clot. Hassan, the director, was trying to sell his land to pay the fees. He was at the meeting and he impressed us considerably. Community is supportive, but don't realise that they also still have to pay fees. The cocoa crop failed. We saw this for ourselves. Cocoa pods grow on trunks. I didn't know. We saw one tree which actually had what would have been the usual number of pods. Too many children, and this also includes refugees from a further skirmish on the border. More buildings. I've mentioned scholarships. One-off donations are always welcome. By standing order, restricted or unrestricted, responding to appeals, following or sharing in Facebook posts. Buy the books. Have you still got the books there, Aaron?
Yes.
Just hold up the books, will you? Thank you. You've sat still very nicely. Okay. There's a third one going to press at the moment. I'll come back to those shortly. Do you want value for money? The Trust says that it takes no expenses. I've got the accounts here for 2021. £151 was paid in banking fees. No other expenses were taken. The books that are at the back, written by Steve, £10 include postage and packaging. £10 goes to the charity, to the schools. Debutantes do exist. They look different from that now, modern debutantes. VSO, Pamela and I presented the case for VSO to be their charity of the year. The organisers were astonished when we said that through the year VSO would send them information about the projects that the money was being spent on. They really were gobsmacked. No other charity had done that. And those are some big name national charities who ought to know better. You will, our supporters are kept in touch. These are the reports on the 4 schools. Now, after not being there for the best part of 2.5, going on 3 years, they are quite long. And the scholarship, if somebody's paying for a scholarship, they get the school reports, and when we can get them, photographs. And the starfish, have you guessed it? One day a man was walking along the beach when he noticed a boy picking up and gently throwing things into the ocean. Approaching the boy, he asked, "Young man, what are you doing?" "Throwing starfish back into the ocean. Surf is up, the tide is going out. If I don't throw them back, they'll die." The man laughed. "Do you realise there are miles and miles of beach and hundreds of starfish? You can't make any difference." After listening politely, the boy bent down to pick up another starfish and threw it into the surf. Then he smiled at the man and said, "I made a difference to that one." And the moral is, everyone can make a difference, even if it affects just one person. Thank you for listening. Sorry I've overrun by a lot, but I'm very happy to answer questions.
Thank you so much.
I hope we started late. And the technology worked wonderfully, so I'm pleased about that too.
Okay, so Sally, I think was first. Yeah, Sally, what's your question?
We've not got a microphone, we just talk.
Actually,
I can just talk.
I'll bring one to you.
How much does it cost to fund a scholarship? Are they all different? What's the sort of cost that the kids get?
I've updated the leaflets. We only do secondary scholarships. We only do boarding scholarships, which, having spoken to the directors and got a much more detailed feel for how much it costs, they are £420 a year, or a half scholarship is £210 a year and can be paid monthly. Like with other donations, I do have forms there if you would like to take one of those away. It can also be done online. So that's a full boarding scholarship. It includes their exam fees and their uniform and their photographs for ID and really pretty much everything that they can think of. So £420 a year is realistic for both of the secondary schools. And sometimes those are the only fees that the school directors can be absolutely certain they're going to get at any one particular time.
Do I need to know? Having looked in my video, it's interesting to see the differences and similarities. What I'm puzzled by, in a primary school, how do the children get to go to that primary school? Do they have to be funded by someone, or do you just get any children who hear about it turn up, whose parents will happen to go to a non-religious school?
I'm not quite getting you. The schools that we've seen are the private schools, and they would be fee-paying. There are no government schools on that.
So the children in that area who haven't got the money can't go?
But the fees are very low.
Yeah. So I'm not saying it's not brilliant.
Yeah.
I think it's a great idea. I'm just wondering how much education is there for free in Uganda?
Well, the old school at Katumba, you know, those blue buildings, set out, actually it's quite a slope and it used to get extremely wet. They were beating the national average for grade 1 at primary leaving exam.
I wasn't asking that.
Oh, sorry.
I was asking, not myself, clear. The primary schools in the area,
Yeah.
private fee paying.
Yeah.
What happens to all the other children in that area? They turn up and just say they want to come. You can't take them. There's no...
They don't go to school.
They just don't.
I mean, the private schools are there by and large and on the whole because the government schools aren't. And that's particularly true the further away from Kampala you get, the further out of town you get.
So yours is the only option, as long as they can pay a little bit?
Yes. Yeah.
And can I ask one more question?
Yeah.
Why is there no possibility of having a Ugandan trustee?
That's a good question. We nearly got Peter and Moses, sorry, I will answer your question, to the World Humanist Conference. They were funded by the Foreign and Commonwealth Office, so the money was there, but the Home Office refused them visas and said you can apply again in 3 weeks, which was doing. Never thought of having one of them as a trustee. Of course, the trustees are looking at all of the schools rather than just the one school. The schools have school boards, and obviously the directors are on those, and Steve is in there. Don't know, we're having a Zoom post-AGM meeting tomorrow. I will have a think about that and see what they would say.
Ugandan Humanist movement, and perhaps there might be someone there who's interested in being a trustee.
Good question. Yeah, I will ask that tomorrow. I do know 1 or 2 of them, but whether they would be or not, I don't know. There might be sensitive financial stuff going on, which would be. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. In one of the schools you mentioned, the primary school, they were learning English.
Yes.
How many other languages are taught, and both as the means of educating and as a separate language?
2008, the only language of instruction was English. It changed so that the kindergarten children would be taught in local language, their mother tongue, if you will. There are many mother tongues, and I think that has rather gone by the board now, because if in a government school, say, a teacher can be told, right, next year you're going to be teaching over there may be nothing in common between their mother tongues. Kiswahili has come back into secondary quite strongly. Idi Amin, of great infamy, was a Kiswahili speaker, and my local colleagues there used to say that's why it's not popular, but that has also come back in. Does that address some of what you were saying? Yeah. So the use of English is important, again, for those who want to go on and get into higher education and so on. And I'm no linguist, so that was kind of one of my conditions for accepting that placement when I was offered it.
Thank you, Chris. I think you've given a talk before, haven't you? And I didn't hear that.
Did I do the God problem in Uganda some way back?
Possibly. I don't know. I haven't heard, so I hope I'm not repeating what you've been asked before. I'm interested in the thought that humanism plays a part in all of this in Uganda, and I'm wondering how strong is humanism in Uganda? I think your answer to Kathy's question was partly that if somebody's going to provide a school somewhere, then there's plenty of people needing it and wanting it.
Yeah.
But I'm interested in how humanism fits in with the religious communities and the schools they provide, and whether people work cooperatively together or whether there's some rivalry. In
the longer run, I know we're at the very beginnings of 4 primary schools. There has always been antagonism Peter had this thing about they'd upset the spirits building on the top of the hill. You know, he's moved on from that. It's just something that they have to deal with. But there are still more children than school places if you take the country as a whole. The government provision just isn't there in the quantity. I mean, how do we get on with the religious affiliation schools in this country? We do, because there's not a lot of choice a lot of the time. So it's not dissimilar, really.
Thanks, mate.
Don't worry, I'll just talk. It's absolutely axiomatic that education is a good thing, we all accept that. But in a country like Uganda, when you have school leavers who are well educated, highly motivated, what's the development like in Uganda for exploiting, for allowing them to use that education?
Sorry, exploiting?
Their education. There's always this thing implied by Africa. That's all very well educating people, but they have no way of using their education because of the level of development. Do you have any idea what happens to your school leavers?
Yes, but not off the top of my head. That is one of the things that we ask the Mustard Seed and Isaac Newton to report on. Many of them do go on to university. Agriculture is very popular and it's easier to get in there than not. And again, I suppose like students here, not in my day, my degree was funded by the government, as was my maintenance throughout. You know, they do jobs at the weekends and in the holidays, and not as many as have the potential, but some of them do.
Is university education their state funded, or is it also self-funded?
Sorry, again, I'm not quite...
University education, once they leave school,
yes,
and they gain places at university, is that state funded?
no.
No.
No, with some exceptions. There are some university places reserved for students with disabilities.
Okay.
I don't know what the criteria is, but you know, there are some things going on, and I think there might be a sort of an academic hurdle that if you're over that. I mean, I will give you an example which is not from the trust. Another thing, back in my VSO days, there was another charity, and one of my sisters started supporting it. This was, you know, nothing to do with what I've been talking about. That young lady is now a qualified obstetrician and gynecologist, and she's heavily pregnant with her first she's convinced she's going to have 5 children. I first saw her when she'd just started secondary, and she was about up to there on me, but she has just got such brain power, and I have been to her home and nothing could be more basic. I think the danger is, amongst friends, is those well-educated young people, if countries like the UK are short of doctors, and who would blame them? You know, because I think, well, speaking for myself, there's a point at which you do the best for your own family. So we've got that dilemma. But yes, that education is there, it is available, it is high quality. Steve would have told us if it wasn't. He knows Makara over the years very well. I think it was the second university in Africa. Sub-Saharan? I think so.
Just a very quick question. Where do the teachers mainly come from, the source of the teachers? Are they university graduates or parents?
That's a very interesting question. What I know most is how the primary teachers' colleges work, because I did 2.5 years there. And they were going for the grade 3 diploma, which was for the lowest level of primary teacher. My subject being maths, my lovely head of department, came to know him well, had wanted a VSO to be at the college to do maths because so many good teachers were failing because they couldn't pass the maths part of the exam. And if I say, for those of you who know about these things, change of base of logarithms was one of the was on the curriculum for these lowest level primary teachers, you will see how ridiculous that would be. And I saw really good teachers, and I saw some quite bad ones as well. And really, I don't think what they were learning in the classroom had all that much to do with it. Just now, this academic year, which is now January to December, it used to start in September again until 2008, so that's how much the British system was influencing it. The government has said that nurses and teachers should all have a university degree. Now, quite how on earth that is going to work, I don't know. I was alarmed when I heard that, because that means that many young people who could be really outstanding teachers of infants and juniors, many very effective, hard-working nurses, maybe if their English wasn't all that good, would not be able to access that level of higher education, never mind the expense of it. So, I mean, the answer to your question is, I don't know. I await developments. My ex-colleague, another Moses, will keep me fully informed as time goes along. So, you know, it's a bit like nurses here suddenly all had to have degrees, didn't they? And did that help? I don't know. Don't know. Pros and cons, probably. But it's a much bigger step up in Uganda from O-level, if you like, to a degree. A-levels will have to come in. Does that mean more students will stay on for A-level? But what if they can't, you know, what if they're not academic enough? It's quite worrying. And I don't know how it's going to work out. The core primary teachers' colleges, like the one that I worked at, and the equivalent for secondary, they are still carrying on doing diploma training. So, watch this space.
Thank you very much, Chris. That was a very interesting talk that you gave. I lived in Uganda for a year, pre-COVID, so things might have changed, and very much recognise the pictures that you were painting there for us. I did some work with universities in Uganda while I was there, and a couple of points. Firstly, I think that religious element that you identified in the schools goes on through into the university system. So Makerere, for instance, will be state funded, but you have, for instance, the Martyrs University that you get. The second point is that, as you would expect, there is a great difference in the quality of the facilities in universities. Makerere, again, obviously, is pretty well funded as is its business school. But I remember visiting and working with a university in the southwest of Uganda, and it was very, very under-resourced in terms of teachers.
Was that the Mbarara one?
Yeah, probably.
No, I was in Bushenyi for 2.5 years, so there we are. So, did you say you went for a year?
I did that for a year, yes.
Yeah.
And I'm a librarian by profession. And I worked with some of the university libraries in Uganda.
Yeah. I mean, the only one that I know at all well is Makerere. And yes, it's a lovely campus, but it's been established there for a long time. Think about the old school in Katumba and the outstanding results that they got. You know, it's surprising things can be positive when you get the teachers with the energy and the enthusiasm and the skills, and children with those potentials.
And commitment as well. That's one thing that came across to me while I was there, but also listening to you. The youngsters are incredibly committed, as are many of their parents.
Yeah. That's, you know, it is admirable, and when you see the conditions that some of them do live under as well. But yes.
We're nearly out of time, but maybe time for one more, Aaron, okay?
Oh.
I thought we wouldn't miss you out.
Thank you, Chris. 2 points. How much does a school cost to build over there? Obviously, you're climbing over here would be millions.
You asked me that when I'd first come back, I think.
Yeah.
And so I have made a mental note. The new school at Katumba, remember, with the yellow and blue buildings and unfinished buildings coming towards us, the initial payment was £50,000. And the prices there are a lot higher than other areas. I mean, Juma explained that this is what you would pay for a brick in Fort Portal, this is what we pay for a brick here. And the bridge having been washed away really made it quite extraordinarily difficult. But that was the headline price for what you saw on those photographs. I don't know, is that a lot or a little? It wouldn't be very much here.
And a very quick point, I think you should do this talk in British schools, because I think as you focus on the dedication of the children paying attention, that might be conflicted here with how people are in house.
I don't like going back into schools. I did this is my 15th year of retirement, and well, if David was there to keep order, I might do it.
Well, thanks so much, Chris. I'm just going to ask you one last thing. I'd like you to pronounce that favourite word of yours again, the one that was... There was a place name that you said, oh, I love saying.
Oh, Bundy Budgio.
Bundy Budgio.
Yeah,
fantastic.
You know, I struggle with a lot of names that are unfamiliar. You know, they put you on a new medicine and you've got to keep writing it down until you've memorised the spelling and how you say it at the pharmacy. Bundy Budgio is the cloppy doggerel of Ugandan towns, because that's one of my new drugs. And as soon as she said it, I thought, I can remember that. But yeah, Bundy Budgio. And it's beautiful. And we stayed at the Comfort Inn, which was adequate, which was all we expected.
Yeah, a Comfort Inn in this country you probably avoid, wouldn't you?
Yeah, well, yes. But no, they made us very welcome. Between the mosque call to prayers in the morning and the evangelical gospel rock in the evening, I slept surprisingly well.
Chris, thanks again for putting it together beautifully, and you've given us a really good update on the schools. So it's great to hear about them. We'll say a little bit more about how people can support the schools. But please give Chris another.